Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining me this evening. I am Jerry D. Wolf, your host for the podcast. And we're going to talk about the best rivalries from WCW. I meant to do this podcast and another podcast and just add in the best rivalries from WCW and the WWE in the same one, but that's all right. So I'll start with the tag team rivalries and just the rivals within the stables that WCW had. I couldn't really pick out 100 best rivalries from WCW. It's just not possible. I think I only came up with like 35, maybe 36. Uh, and then I just kind of filled in some space. So here we go. The Rock and Roll Express versus the Midnight Express. One of the very best rivalries, if not the best rivalry in WCW history. Um, Morton and Gibson, and Condrey, uh, and beautiful Bobby Eaton. Just can't get any better than that. You just you can't get any better than that. The two tag teams that really highlighted what it was like growing up in the 80s and 90s. There were just four guys that we just really looked up to, and Jim Cornette got to be a part of that, and it just made it that much better. Uh, we've got the Legion of Doom versus the Midnight Express. That was another great rivalry. Legion of Doom versus the Steiner brothers. I remember seeing pay per view for the tournament, and the Legion of Doom and the Steiners had a great match on that card. And I couldn't tell you who the winner of it was, but I remember it being memorable enough to make a note of. Hulk Hogan versus the Dungeon of Doom / Faces of Fear. I know a lot of people might think that that's not a great rivalry, but I really enjoyed it. I think at the time I was probably 11, maybe 12 when that rivalry was taking place. So I was just a kid, and some of the dark elements of the Dungeon of Doom really neat. I wasn't really a big fan of Kevin Sullivan. I never saw his appeal, uh, but I liked the other guys in it. I could have done without the freaking Yeti. I thought that was just strange. Harlem Heat versus the NWO. Mainly Harlem Nash. Uh, their tag matches that they had were just phenomenal from start to finish. You can't get a better tag team wrestler than Booker T. Um, he's if you've got him in your corner, he's got your six. You know what I mean? And same goes for Scott Hall. I've never been big on Kevin Nash. I've never really seen his appeal other than, he's a giant. He's 7 foot tall. And Scott Hall really complimented him, and I think really put Kevin Nash more over than he was. Another great rivalry was between the Steiner brothers and Harlem Heat. I'm a big Steiners fan, and Scott, he really became the bigger star of the Steiners, but when they were together, they were perfection in the ring. Not only were they great professional wrestlers, they had a collegiate background, and that really helped their their push or as professional wrestlers and as main event players was the fact that they had collegiate background in in athletics. The Nasty Boys versus Harlem Heat. I really enjoyed that rivalry quite a bit. Um, I cannot remember if Sensational Sherry was with Harlem Heat at that time, or if it was possibly oh, what's that guy's name? The Colonel. I I can't remember if he was with them at that time, but I always enjoyed watching the Nasty Boys in their matches. But their rivalry with Harlem Heat was pretty solid. Matter of fact, I might go back and watch some of their matches that they had. Some people are going to think this is a little unpopular, and some people probably think my choice in the Nasty Boys being a popular rivalry. They might think it's crazy, but the moments that led up to the big match with Carl Malone and Diamond Dallas Page versus Hollywood Hogan and Dennis Rodman, I thought that was pretty unique. And I was not a Carl Malone fan at the time. I was a lifelong Chicago Bulls fan, so you know I'm a Michael Jordan dude, so I did not like Carl Malone. So I was NWO at this point because I'm thinking to myself, man, you got one of the Chicago Bulls coming out there with Hollywood Hulk Hogan. It just makes Dennis Rodman that much cooler in my view. So I was on the NWO boat at that point, and I was really kind of torn between should I think Hollywood Hogan is cool. I really can't stand him since he turned heel, but he's so good at being a bad guy. Maybe I should start liking him because some heels you just love to hate, and as much as you love to hate Hollywood Hogan, he becomes so good at being a bad guy you start to like him. Then you've also got Hall and Nash versus Sting, Macho Man, and Randy Savage. This is Bash at the Beach, 1996, and Kevin Nash and Scott Hall. You know, they don't. The audience doesn't know who the third guy is going to be. It's advertised, you know, as a third guy that's supposed to be there, and nobody, not Sting or Macho Man or Randy Savage, knows who's going to be the third man, and then Hogan shows up, and that's the biggest moment, one of the biggest moments in wrestling history. So it has to be one of the best rivalries between WCW and NWO taking over. The Outsiders versus the Steiners. Oh, I love this rivalry because I loved seeing Scott Steiner turn heel, turn into a bad guy, and turning on his brother. And I even like Rick Steiner's solo run. Um, Going back and watching some of his Mid South wrestling matches, and as the Dogface Gremlin in WCW, I always liked Rick Steiner better than Scott Steiner, but you can't deny that Scott is a beast on the mic, and he's a genetic freak. Big Papa Pump, I tell you what, he sure knows how to cut a promo. The Four Horsemen versus the NWO. So you got an interview going on. It's a parody. It's kind of like DX making fun of the Nation of Domination. You got Kevin Nash and Buff Bagwell and Sean Waltman, Six Pack, doing an interview, and Sean Waltman is playing the part of Ric Flair, and Kevin Nash is wearing a balding cap with a neck brace on, playing the part of Arn Anderson. And I believe Buff Bagwell is playing the part of Kurt Hennig because at this point uh, in WCW, Kurt Hennig was trying to be a part of the Four Horsemen. And the promo was so scathing because it's making fun of Arn Anderson really calling it quits. And they're talking about giving giving up a spot. Arn Anderson is going to give Kurt Hennig his spot in the Four Horsemen, not just anybody's spot, not your dog's spot, not her spot, his spot, but my spot, your liver spot. No, my spot. So it was just one of the most entertaining interviews. I couldn't stand it as a fan when I was growing up, and I saw that. I was like, "Why are they making fun of Arn Anderson? I don't get it." Like I wasn't in on it. I didn't know what was going on. And in retrospect, seeing some of the things that they've said in interviews about this and whatnot, uh, it's like, oh my gosh. So they weren't, obviously they weren't making fun of Arn Anderson, but they were. Um, but I believe Arn Anderson took it personally, if memory serves me correct. And then we've got Sting versus the NWO. Uh, Easily one of the greatest things about WCW was when Sting had the crow look and he came down from the rafters and he just whooped everybody's ass. And that was his shtick. Uh, Except he had a bat, not a stick, but that was his shtick. um, so on to the solo rivalries. I touched on those because I knew I wasn't going to have 100 freaking rivalries for WCW. 100 best. Cactus Jack versus Vader. Um, Man, they had some brutal matches, uh, especially in Japan. But in WCW, the rivalry was just as lit, and it's one of the best rivalries I think WCW had. So that's why I consider it one of the top ones. Booker T versus Scott Steiner. Um, at the time, it was white hot. Is the term I'm going to use because both of these guys are finally establishing themselves as solo guys. They're no longer uh, trying to, be in that tag team um, spot on the card. They're wanting that main spot. Scott Steiner is so good in promos, and Booker T can be. He can be creative what he wants to be, but he's not the best. But in my opinion, it doesn't necessarily have to be the person that's the best on the mic. It is the best for business. Sometimes the best for business is the person that busts their ass day in and day out, and shows up and does the work. And Booker T does that, and that's all that matters about T. And if you ain't down with that sucker, Sid Vicious versus Bill Goldberg. I'm not going to give Bill Goldberg a lot of credit as far as rivalries because he quite honestly doesn't deserve it. I liked Bill Goldberg when he was first in WCW. I love him. He's from Tulsa. Um, as I grew older, it's like, but he never wanted to be billed for Tulsa. That's weird. He just wanted to be billed from Atlanta. But when he came to Tulsa, they said he was from Tulsa. So it's like, whatever. But it's confusing as a fan from Tulsa why a guy from Tulsa wouldn't want to be billed from here. But and his rivalry with Sid Vicious, even though it's not the most memorable, I remembered it being entertaining enough to mention. Uh, I'm a big Sid Vicious fan, and even though he's made some blunders on the mic and blunders in the ring, the blunder in the ring I'm referring to is him coming off the top turnbuckle. I wouldn't wish that on anybody. What happened to him, but his rivalry with Will Goldberg was entertaining, so that's why it made this Raven versus Diamond Dallas Page. Man, they had some tough skirmishes. Like they really went at it. I've always liked watching Diamond Dallas Page's clotheslines, not just his diamond cutter, or how the bar or how the power bomb turns into the diamond cutter, how it transitions. Like that, Diamond Dallas Page is very creative and innovative in the ring, and maybe one of the most innovative in the ring. I give him a lot of credit, and Raven is such a good heel that it's hard not to hate Raven when he's playing the bad guy, and that's why this makes the list. Raven versus Perry Saturn. Well, I remember them having some really not just hardcore matches, but great technical matches at the same time. They're both great in the ring. It's not anything to do with freaking back. It's not everything to do with hardcore that style of matches. Like Raven wasn't just all about being hardcore. He was great in the ring also, and he was just as good delivering that DDT as anybody else. And Harry Saturn took him to the limit every time they got in the ring, and they were just one of the best rivalries I think in WCW. Sting versus Bret Hart. Um, it wasn't the best rivalry in the world, but it was still entertaining enough to keep my attention. And seeing Sharpshooter versus Scorpion Deathlock, you grow up wanting to see it, and then you finally do. Ric Flair versus Randy Savage. Um, their WCW rivalry wasn't as memorable as the one in WWF, but I'm still going to give it credit because both of them could still go in the ring and they could still spit fire on the microphone. Ric Flair versus Hulk Hogan. I love seeing their cage match at Halloween Havoc. Um, I was really amped up to see that because we had at that point I had never seen Ric Flair versus Hulk Hogan, and I think a lot of us hadn't. Ric Flair versus Terry Funk. Um, Probably one of my more favorites of the of rivalries from WCW because what Terry Funk was, uh, he was always great on the mic, but what he was saying on the mic and to Ric Flair during their segments in this rivalry, man, he was really letting him have it, and he was like not holding back. And that's why I love Terry Funk. He was just not just great in the ring, but he was great on the mic. He knew how to um, connect with the crowd. He knew how to resonate. Ric Flair versus Ricky Steamboat. If that's not on your top 10 list rivalries from WCW, something's wrong with you. They got matches that will keep you guessing from start to finish and get your heart palpitating and make you want to do something. Eddie Guerrero versus Chavo Guerrero. Um, so we've seen Chavo and Eddie both as heel and face, and both of them do it so well. But I think Chavo pulls off a heel a lot better than he does a face. Eddie Guerrero could do either, and their WCW rivalry was nothing short of awesome. Rey Mysterio versus Dean Malenko. I don't think there's a big enough word to describe. Um, how great their rivalry was, other than perfect. Uh, both of them are ring generals. They really are. Um, they really know how to have a commanding presence and go from bell to bell, have a technically sound match, have an aerial match, a match with everything going on, all kinds of different styles of wrestling, and make you go, wow, every time they have a match together. Uh, I can't say enough positive things about Dean Malenko or Rey Mysterio because they're two of the greatest professional wrestlers of all time. One of the greatest rivalries in any promotion is Dean Malenko and Rey Mysterio. I can't speak highly enough of either of them. Chris Jericho versus Dean Malenko. They had some pretty damn great matches, and they also had Jericho on the mic, so he was doing his thing. And I think at this point he was giving his speech of 1004 holds because Dean Malenko is known as the man of 1,000 holds. So Jericho came up with a few more and literally had a list of all his moves. Armbar. Brian Pillman versus Jushin Thunder Liger. Um, I can't remember which episode it was, but I believe it was just on a regular Nitro appearance, and maybe it was the first episode of Nitro. It easily could have been, but it's one of the greatest matches in WCW history. It's literally one of the, I believe it's on the double disc greatest matches in WCW, something like that. I think I have that earlier somewhere. But Brian Pillman had gone way too soon. Too bad he couldn't see his son grow up and wrestle for AEW and NXT because he's really putting in the work. Chris Benoit versus Kevin Sullivan. The only reason I'm giving this any mention because both of them uh, have shade all over them. Is the fact that the backstage segment that happened with them on Nitro, I want to say that was one of the coolest things I had seen on Monday nights at that point. I was like, I hadn't seen too many backstage segments, I guess. I mean, you see matches with like the Big Show and Mankind and Broiler and Brawls, but Kevin Sullivan and Chris Benoit slugging it out backstage was one of the coolest moments for me because I was like, man, I don't get to see a lot of this. I think at this point, as a fan, I hadn't seen a lot of hardcore wrestling, and I hadn't seen a lot of these backstage segments quite as often. And to me, that's what made it so memorable. Hollywood Hogan versus Randy Savage. When they had their rivalry in WCW, uh, and they're finally not limited to what the WWF and what Vince McMahon can tell them to do. They still put on classic matches. Um, I want to say that Macho Man and Hogan had a steel cage match uh, for their rivalry in WCW, and I remember it being pretty damn good. So I may have to go back and watch that because I remember it being one of my favorite rivalries in WCW. Ric Flair versus Lex Luger. I'm mentioning this for somebody else. I didn't really ever get into WCW until right after this rivalry, but a buddy of mine, Dan, he loved this rivalry and he was talking about it to me on more than one occasion. So that's the reason why I added it in here. Rey Mysterio versus Eddie Guerrero. Um, a rivalry that transcends the business because they went to WCW with this rivalry, they went to WWE with this rivalry, and their rivalry in WWE having Dominic Mysterio as part of the rivalry made it a little uncomfortable or a little unsettling for some viewers. It wasn't for me. I didn't think nothing of it, but you could definitely tell that the fans were a little shocked, especially Rey Mysterio's family. Uh, Kevin Nash versus Bill Goldberg. It's only memorable because Scott Hall gave the cattle prod to Bill Goldberg, and they finally beat the streak. That's the only reason why it's memorable. Um, some of these matches, that's the reason why I put it on here because it just happened to be memorable. Uh, WCW got really murky at some point, and the championship scene for the World Heavyweight Championship uh, got to where the championship was just being changed way too often. And Goldberg, uh, he wasn't really meant for wrestling, in my opinion, but he was meant for the football field. And he really showed his strength and ferocity from the football field in the ring. And that's what got him over, was his intensity in the ring. Um, I can't really tell you what Kevin Nash brought to the ring. Uh, I'm not dogging on his moveset or anything. I never really saw what Kevin Nash brought. So I think it's the reason why I'm saying that this rivalry is only getting mentioned for the simple fact that Scott Hall held in the streak. And I'm a big Scott Hall fan. And at this time, I was a Goldberg fan. So I was like, wait a minute, what the hell is happening? You know, but it was still cool how it ended in retrospect. Because looking back, Goldberg I was a big fan of his then. Um, I wouldn't say I'm a big fan of his now, but I think that's a big part of the reason why it doesn't get a lot of credit for me. Is just because over time your feelings about certain people change, and you have to really separate the wrestler from the person. Let's see here. Lex Luger versus Hollywood Hogan. There wasn't much of a build. There wasn't any build up to their match on Monday Nitro. It's kind of like the Goldberg match with Hollywood Hogan on Nitro, and Lex Luger beats Hollywood Hulk Hogan for the World Heavyweight Championship, and with hardly any build up at all. And their rivalry, I think, lasts till Hog Wild, and I think so. It's probably less than a month that Luger is champion, and it's already gone. But the fact that Luger won it on Nitro, and I was watching it live when it happened, made it that much more special because I'm a big Lex Luger fan. He might not be the greatest wrestler of all time, and he might not be in the top 10, but he's one of my favorites. So that's why it is an important rivalry to mention. Hulk Hogan versus the Giant. Again, it's not necessarily about who's um, got the greatest move set in the world, but what you have the best memories of. And I think Hulk Hogan versus the Giant was just memorable enough for me to make a note of because they had some dark moments because of the Dungeon of Doom uh, being associated with the Giant. Hulk Hogan versus Vader. This is a rivalry that should have happened in WWF as well. That should have been a WrestleMania main. That's just a big, you know, uh, two big ass names. You get a name when you get two names like that on the card in the main event, you're going to pull in fans. And maybe this should have been at Starcade because Hogan versus Vader would have brought in a lot of faces. Booker T versus Jeff Jarrett. Again, it's one of those things where it's so memorable because it was so controversial. The whole BS with Hogan and Russo that was tied to this rivalry. It sucks that has to cast so much shade over the match that they had later in the night because Booker T showed what a star he was and that he just did deserve to be the WCW World Heavyweight Champion. Booker T versus Chris Benoit, probably the second greatest. I would say the second greatest rivalry in WCW. Their series that they had, I want to say it was like a best of seven series. I didn't look a whole lot of this stuff up because I wanted to say what I remember. Yeah, so they had a best of seven series in WCW, but I believe they also had a best of seven series in WWE. And I did not want to get those confused. But I I could have, and I think I may have mentioned this on the best rivalries in WWE. It was my other podcast. Like I said, I meant to mention uh, these rivalries on any other podcast that I just didn't. And Chris Benoit versus Booker T uh, was another is just another rivalry that transcends the business because being able to cross over uh, with the same guy in an angle and go over to another promotion, the same two guys in another angle is just the same. Best of seven series in two different promotions, and it was two of the best rivalries that either promotion has ever had. That really said something about the performer. Larry Zbyszko versus Scott Hall. Um, I don't know if it makes my top 10, but it's very memorable because I love seeing Scott Hall being such a bad guy and bullying Larry Zbyszko around. And I love Larry Zbyszko being, the baby face he was. He was really trying so hard to distract Scott Hall during some of his matches. And I just like seeing Scott Hall uh, being a dick, I guess. Scott Hall versus Sting. Um, Anytime I saw Sting and Scott Hall in a match together, I knew I was going to get magic. I knew they were going to put on a spectacle because both of them are excellent in the ring. Both of them are excellent with ring psychology and just the technical aspects of wrestling. And it's not one of the most memorable rivalries in WCW, but they definitely had their battles. Scott Hall versus Diamond Dallas Page. They had some great matches together, and Scott Hall knew how to sell for Diamond Dallas Page and vice versa. The two of them have always been good buddies, and that's another reason why they had such great in-ring chemistry. The Macho Man versus Diamond Dallas Page. Uh, One of the absolute best rivalries in WCW. They had some great moments outside of the ring, throwing each other into the guardrail over and over. And I think it's just one of those things. It's like this is a perfect moment. Anytime the Diamond Dallas Page put on the Diamond Cutter on the Macho Man, it was really satisfying. It was really cool seeing how I guess just how cool it looked when those two guys did that. It didn't look any cooler to do a Diamond Cutter than when the Macho Man was on the receiving end. Jake the Snake Roberts versus Sting. This is another rivalry that my buddy Dan introduced to me, and I've only seen bits and pieces of it. And I haven't. I don't think I've actually gotten to see the whole rivalry. I've only gotten to see like one match, but I know that they had more than one match together, and I really need to watch more of it. But I remember him saying that it was one of the more memorable matches from WCW. I'm gonna have to give it some more attention. Vader versus Ric Flair. Uh, again, WCW, it can't be remembered for 100 rivalries, let alone 50. I'm surprised I gave it as many as I did, especially this one, because the only thing that was really memorable about it was Ric Flair was really trying to bounce back and revitalize his career. And he did. So kudos to him. And he just showed what an athlete he is. Uh, and Vader is just great at putting people over because I'm getting ready to mention him again. Vader versus Sting. Uh, Sting is good in anything, and I just like seeing Sting bringing down a big guy. When you saw Sting bring down somebody that was way bigger than him, it was like, hell yes, that's badass. Sting always shows he can capitalize no matter what style of match it is, whether it's brawn or whether it's technical matches. Uh, he could do it all. And seeing a big guy like Vader having to go through what Sting gave him was just incredible because it was like, dang, can a guy that much smaller really whoop that a big guy like that? It's David versus Goliath kind of thing. Vader versus Ron Simmons. What I was mentioning before, Vader knew how to put guys over, and Ron Simmons was the first um, black world heavyweight champion in WCW, and that was a match that was in Baltimore, and it's definitely on my top 10 list. It's a very emotional moment when Ron Simmons wins the WCW championship because he's not just the first black world heavyweight champion in WCW. He's just a great representative of what a world heavyweight champion should be. He played football for Florida State University, and he was just an amazing athlete there. They I think they're at Florida State, and Ron Simmons showed what a crossover athlete he could be, and he's also just an amazing individual altogether. I've got to see him in a Q&A session in Oklahoma City, and I'm getting to see him uh, there live with those guys talking about Doug Road stories and some of the best moments and matches that they've had in their career. That was one of the best moments in my life. That was a real highlight for me. Ron Simmons is one of my absolute favorite wrestlers of all time. Lex Luger versus Sting. And seeing these guys actually being rivals instead of friends was really different. But again, when two friends get in the ring, they show what great chemistry they have in the ring and how great a match can flow. And Lex Luger and Sting were able to complement each other and do that. Um, Lex Luger, being a former football star, he's got the intensity and he's got the power and he's got the strength and the wherewithal. and Sting's just a little more, uh, got a little bit more in the bank when it comes to stamina and endurance. And that's the reason why Sting just shows that he's the better athlete than Lex Luger. Lex Luger didn't really want to get into the business. He wanted to play football. But somebody said, well, you got the body for this, and why not? Hollywood Hogan versus Sting. Uh, of course, it's going to be one of my top 10 rivalries from WCW. It's literally the most memorable rivalry for me. Growing up in the 90s, in the Attitude Era, you got Monday Night Raw, WCW Monday Night, and you're either going back and forth or you're loyal to one. And I would go back and forth. But when it came down to the main event time, and they would have segments between Hollywood Hogan and Sting, I was paying attention. And that's another reason why WCW kicked WWE's ass in the rings for so long, is because we, at the time, you could not have had a better rivalry tried. Hulk Hogan and Sting, two of the biggest names in professional wrestling in general, and they made box office magic. The guys put on a wrestling clinic every time they got in the ring together. Sting more so, just due to the fact that he's a better, way better technical wrestler. I don't uh, think Hulk Hogan, but I think technical wrestler because he's not one. He's more of an entertainer and a superstar than he is a wrestler. But he is an icon, and a lot of people look up to him. And I looked up to him for a long time. Uh, Having this consummate good guy take on a heel role and go up against this guy looking like the Crow, and he's actually got a crow with him, and he's got a black bat with him, and he's got all these elements that have completely transformed his look from the surfer boy, the blonde, flat tops and the colorful paint to all this black and white darkness. And this is a different look, and I'm all here for it. And me as a teenager seeing Hollywood Hulk Hogan and Sting were some of the greatest moments I had as a wrestling fan. And last but not least, Ric Flair and Sting. From the time they began till the time it was time to call it quits, they had some of the best matches together. They even fought as a tag team as when Sting had his time with the Four Horsemen, and short lived. They had to fight together, and they've had several matches where they've had to go from bell to bell. They've had 60-minute matches. They've had to go a full hour, and they just show time in and time out why they're two of the biggest names in business, because nobody can go in the ring like Ric Flair and Sting. Uh, there's just there's nobody better. Nobody's a better heel than Ric Flair, and nobody's a better babyface than Sting. Um, you can say that Hulk Hogan is, but in my opinion, I think Sting is the better babyface. That's obviously up for debate, and maybe it makes for a good argument. It makes for a podcast all on its own. Who's the better babyface, Sting or Hulk Hogan? But Ric Flair and Sting is a rivalry that will stand the test of time. And when it's all said and done, uh, it will still be the greatest rivalry that WCW ever had. Um, I think that's all I can say about the rivalries in WCW. Um, it sucks that I can't have as long as the list of rivalries from WCW as I can from WWF, but it's simply just due to the fact that the lineage of the championship got really it got muddied up, and Russo wanted to go in a completely different direction, and Hogan wanted to go into business all for himself. And those are still current themes in the way professional wrestling is run. If you don't believe me, just just watch. Just watch all Elite Wrestling. Watch Monday Night Raw and watch SmackDown. Watch TNA. Watch it all. Watch New Japan. Watch Ring of Honor. Watch everything you can while you can, because one day you ain't gonna be able to watch it anymore. And it just seems like a lot of people like to throw shade on AEW. But I watch them both and I enjoy both. And there are things that I like to pick on, and I'll save that for more podcasts. Uh, but until then, keep an open mind on other wrestling promotions, because just making negative comments on social media about one promotion all day long doesn't make you important. It doesn't make you relevant. It doesn't make you a better person. It doesn't make you any bigger of a person. It just makes you look small and unimportant. So take that as you will. I will try to have another podcast out soon, but I think that'll be the last podcast for the night. Again, if you're listening, I appreciate it. Whether you're listening on YouTube, Twitter, or Facebook, um, I hope y'all have a blessed weekend. Hope you get to be with your loved ones, spend all the time that you can with them while they're still here.
Wow.